Welcome everyone. Welcome to centrexIT and Veeam webinar, Microsoft 365 Security and Backup, Why You Need It. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this webinar and we'll send the link out once it's available. We do have a question and answer period planned for the end. Please go ahead and type any questions you have in the chat as they come up and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. We have two presenters today, Sean Ernst and Michael Deemer from Veeam. Michael is a VMware sales professional engineer for Veeam. He brings nearly a decade's worth of IT experience with a focus in system and cloud engineering and a high proficiency in hardware and software technologies. Sean is the director of technology for centrexIT. He's served on the Cisco Service Provider Advisory Council since 2018 and leads technology development at centrexIT with a passion for finding cutting-edge solutions for clients. He is skilled in technology leadership, IT security, IT research and development, ITIL-based IT service management, and digital transformation of mid-market businesses. Starting us off today, we're going to be reviewing how Microsoft 365 helps protect information, identity, and access, and against threats, how to manage security with Microsoft 365, and of course, disaster recovery with Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 is designed to help people and businesses achieve more with innovative Office apps, intelligent cloud services, and world-class security. I'd like to introduce Grant Page, who is our Director of Sales and Marketing for centrexIT, and he's going to give a brief introduction to who centrexIT is.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Appreciate it, and really appreciate everyone joining today's webinar on Microsoft 365 backups and security. As Jennifer mentioned, so we've been in business for over 18 years, almost 19 in July, and we have great experience with Microsoft 365 backups, with Veeam, et cetera, by leading the way in the IT management space, along with cybersecurity services since 2002. You can find us on Google, Yelp, Better Business Bureau, Cloud Tango. We've been rated one of the best places to work, one of the top MSPs, and the Inc. 5000. So we love working with our vendors and our partners to make sure that we deliver top quality services to our clients and partners. And as such, the next slide will show some examples of just the level of commitment we have with these different valued clients and partners, such as Veeam today, to join us on the webinar on best practices with Microsoft 365 security and backups. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sean, our Director of Technology, on the next slide.
Thank you very much, Grant. Appreciate everyone coming today. So really want to just start off by saying the context for what we're talking about. And when we talk about security, I think there's no better metaphor for security than talking about the castle. And so security is a layered approach in that there's no one size fits all for any organization, but really multiple layers of security to really protect the organization and mitigate risk. And using the castle analogy, you have a castle that typically has high walls. You have guards that will be, at the top of the castle, a moat that's probably going to be around, maybe some alligators or crocodiles, depending on where you are, that are guarding the moat, the gate. There are multiple levels to protect the castle. So using that same kind of approach when it comes to security around information technology is key, because each business is going to have different needs, and what's good for one organization isn't always going to be the same for another. Go to the next slide, Jennifer. So if we look at just what are some core aspects of a quality cybersecurity solution, we're touching a few high-level items here, and most of these may be familiar to some people. Things like perimeter security, which is a firewall that would be protecting a physical network. Endpoint protection, so each endpoint that connects to a network would have an antivirus or content filtering on it. Information security, and that's really kind of role-based access control around How are we securing data? Who has access to what data that may be in our environment? Authentication protocols, and that could be anything from two-factor authentication, an identity access manager or provider. And then we talk about Veeam being a part of that. It's, when you look at backup and disaster recovery as a part of cybersecurity, you wouldn't necessarily think that it is critical to delivering cybersecurity. But when you look at the overall cybersecurity strategy, backup and disaster recovery is, if not one of the most critical aspects of it. And lastly, there you have network monitoring, and that's monitoring what's going on the network, what's connecting, who's connecting, what devices are connecting. Is it coming from a remote location that may be out of the country or out of state? All of those things really make up the core aspects of a cybersecurity solution. Let's go to the next slide, Jennifer.
All right, we're going to throw up a quick poll before we go into the next slide.
Perfect.
This one is a question of how mature is your current cybersecurity solution? This just gets you thinking about, well, where are you right now? And like, where do you want to be? We'll just give a couple of moments to do that poll, and then we'll share the results with everyone. All right. Okay, this gives Sean a good rule of thumb about what to kind of target also the rest of the presentation.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so when we talk about what a traditional network look like and how that they could be infiltrated, it was pretty basic in that sense. Is that if everything was stored on premise at an environment, you would have perimeter access that would be blocking those malicious actors from the outside. If a compromised system had access to that and they were able to get through that perimeter network, that perimeter security, what you have then is compromise at the physical premise location. That has evolved more recently, but when you look at this, it's amazing that this didn't happen sooner than the last few years in the way that kind of security was looked at in information technology. If we go to the next slide, now that things have started to kind of expand and we have more SaaS and cloud-based solutions, what you're seeing is that the attack vectors now are, if not 10x as large as they were previously, simply because we have data stored in different areas. So if some data is in a SaaS solution, that has its own nuances as it comes to security and how you secure it. When we talk about O365 and having data there are multiple ways that someone could get into your O365 environment. So as we continue to mature and as SaaS solutions and cloud-based solutions mature, so does the risk that's associated with securing them. So in this type of environment, what you have now is a lot more risk because you have data that's stored and siloed data that's stored in multiple different solutions across the internet. So when we talk about what the requirements of securing them are, it's different tasks and there are different requirements associated with them. When we look at kind of the default things, when we talk about training employees on how to access these systems, what are approved devices, the appropriate means in which they should get access, the tools in which we use to secure them. And that could be anything from mentioned before, like identity access management or two-factor authentication, having approved devices that are allowed to access those systems and not just kind of leaving it to chance. And that kind of falls in line with policies, and policies could be something as simple I think probably the simplest level is a policy that governs how your employees should access information technology, but also actual policies that then define what they're able to do with that. The probably the easiest way to do that, and the easiest way to look at that, is don't leave anything to chance, because we are humans, we have emotions, we act on our emotions and our interpretations of what we see. And ultimately, if you leave things to chance, you're opening up a bigger risk that probably shouldn't be there. Go to the next slide. Perfect. So when we going into the M365 side, this really, before you start, the first thing to tell anyone is you need to understand what your IT ecosystem looks like. And so that's understanding what applications are you using? What should you be monitoring? What are the things that are there that should be monitoring? What devices do you have in your environment? Who has access to your environment? So when we look at all the different aspects of this, there is a lot of unknown that comes along with this. When we did this internally for ourselves, we were almost surprised at how many applications, we actually use. We knew they were there, but when you actually consolidate it down, you recognize how much data is out there that we may be using that we needed to ensure was secured. So a quick tip on doing this, when we talk about security frameworks that are available to you, there is a plethora of frameworks out there that you can use. One of the easiest ones to adopt is the Center for Internet Security has their what's called CIS 20 or CSC 20. CSC stands for Critical Security Controls, and their top 20 controls and sub-controls there really can help guide you to how to identify and prioritize the areas that you're most vulnerable. The reason why we would say CIS is because it's the most generic, the most generic security framework that's available to you, that's applicable across multiple industries, no matter who you are. So what are the Microsoft Security and Compliance Centers? When we look at them, these used to be combined before it was, and this is kind of confusing even to me still, when it was Office 365 Security and Compliance Centers, they were kind of combined. When the move happened to M365, there was kind of a separation of these, but it was a separation, but also a combination of different areas. So when we talk about Security Center, it's really a centralized portal that combines the different aspects of threat detection. So protection, detection, investigation, and response to email, collaboration, identity, and device threats. On the other side with compliance, M365 Compliance Center is a centralized portal that allows you to easily access the data and tools to manage your organization's compliance needs. When we mentioned before that every organization is different and their requirements and their compliance requirements especially are going to be different, ultimately you need the ability to have a system that can really adhere to any one of those. And that's really where Compliance Center comes in and becomes extremely beneficial. So a few screenshots we'll go over here. This is the Security Center. So Security Center really combined a few different areas for M365. And when you look at this, this combined Defender for O365, Microsoft's EDR, which is extended detection and response, and Defender for M365. So really it took all these things that was threat hunting, threat identification, and then threat remediation really got bundled into the M365 Security Center. This would be one of the landing pages that you would see there that ultimately gives you a few of these cards that are up there, give you kind of a quick snapshot as to what are the things that are most important to you right now. When we talk about a security score, when we look at that, you may say, well, that security score doesn't look great. There are aspects of this also that you need to make sure that you've done due diligence so you're not giving yourself a false sense of doom or a false sense of confidence as it relates to this. So understanding what is in your environment and what is going on really becomes key in making sure that these great tools that Microsoft and the M365 Security Center offer are being used in a way that's giving you the best ability to defend your organization. So we talk about the secure score. The secure score is really a roll-up of a lot of the different modules that were within the Security Center. These modules contribute to the score, which gives you an overall status of where you are as an organization. When it comes to security, there's one key thing to remember, and that's at either end of the security spectrum, whether you're high risk or highly configured for security, it's something to note that you never necessarily, having the highest score doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the best position. Too little, the low score on the low end, what you have is too many risks in the environment. If your security score is super high, it's a good thing to have, but if it hinders the business's ability to perform its normal functions, what you have is another challenge that you need to overcome. So making sure you understand the risks that are there, and being able to say, are these acceptable risks? Is the risk small enough that as an organization, we're okay with accepting this risk, ensuring that we have a mitigation plan in place for us to be able to overcome this risk should something arise. On the secure score, this also shows you the impact score of that and what are those different policies and improvement actions that you may want to have. So when looking at these will tell you a lot of the things that are inherent to your configuration with M365 and the devices and users that are there, and ultimately understand what are those risks and what would impact that score. Typically, the higher the score impact, the higher the risk that's going to be there. But ultimately taking these one by one and ensuring you're not looking at them as a whole, but individually, because each individual one has its own implications should you choose to take action on them. A permissions report is going to give you an idea of what users are at risk, any devices that may be out of compliance. If you've configured compliance, device compliance requirements in there, if there are any devices that aren't there, they're going to surface themselves here, as well as any user policies that may be defined as well. Privileged apps or privileged OAuth apps there on that next card really would be anything that you've built an integration with that may have privileged access into your environment that could potentially create some unintended consequences as a result. Understanding what apps you have integrated in your environment is key to ensuring that security not only is securing your M365 environment, but also all the other ancillary systems that you may have integrated. And threat analytics. So the threat analytics side of this really focuses on the latest threats that may be out there. We've seen just in the last couple of days that gasoline is being put into plastic bags and any bin that anyone can find. But those threats that all come from there really are going to come from this threat analytics. Microsoft Security Analytics team is a huge team that's 100% focused on making sure they identify what are the latest risks and threats that are out there to you and your business. Understanding what they are, understanding what the attack vectors of those threats are becomes extremely important into the policies changes that you may be making for your organization. We see it pretty much on a weekly, if not daily basis of new threats that get identified, whether that's third-party applications we may be using, the way that, ransomware being the most predominant is being delivered to end users. So understanding what those threats are and those vectors becomes key for us and providing a defensible position for our employees and the organization. And going further into that threat and vulnerability management, again, the exposure score is what is your exposure as it relates to your environment. When we talk about threat and vulnerability, threats are always going to be there. How vulnerable we are to those threats really is going to be determined by how we've secured our environment and what steps we've taken to ensuring the security of not only our users, our devices, but our organization as a whole. So understanding what those vulnerabilities are as it relates to the devices on the network is key. Understanding what those vulnerabilities as it relates to the user may be a little different, but it still provides you an exposure score, which lets you know how exposed you are as an organization. So in the 365 Compliance Center, what we're really talking about is how do we, we've talked about how do we secure and protect our organization, but when we talk about compliance, we're talking about kind of a different means. Security ultimately can roll up to compliance. Compliance is going to be a set of requirements that we have as an organization, and depending on what industry we are in, it may be different from organization to organization. if you're just a mom and pop shop, a brick and mortar, you may not have as many needs from a compliance side as, say, a healthcare client or a pharmaceutical organization does. But ultimately, compliance and being able to comply with certain regulations is key, again, to ensuring that that you're meeting the needs of whatever your industry is. Some industries may not have any compliance needs, and saying not any, at a bare minimum, may have some very basic requirements. Even those organizations that don't have those ultimately can still benefit from ensuring that they have some base level, some baseline for them to be able to look at their organization and see where they are. When we mentioned CIS 20, that's really the kind of entry level, or like the most, no matter what organization you are, that's probably going to be the easiest way to get started with it. So your compliance score is going to be a culmination of a lot of the policies that we had talked about, the data that's connected between all those different systems, but how it relates to a regulatory or compliance framework. Those frameworks can be anything from explicit IT requirements, but also all the way up to training, end user training. When we look at compliance, we typically think of, it says I need to do X and I do X. There are other elements to that over and above it, which is, things like training. So when you talk about compliance, we're not just talking about the technology side of it and making sure technology is compliant, but also the people that are there. So our compliance score is culminated by all those different elements coming together and outputting where we are as an organization, what our compliance looks like. A few items here to note, kind of some of the screenshots. So in this one, there's 268 items. When you look at this one, a lot of these would be some baseline data baseline protections. And that could be anything from, if you look at the examples there, we don't want any jailbroken phones on our network. And so that's just something as simple as, rolling out the Microsoft Intune and mobile device management, and it just doing a check to see, are these devices jailbroken or not? All of these different elements, again, when talking about security, really are going to require a improvement action by improvement action plan. So you're not looking at them as a whole. Looking at 268 items sounds like a monumental task to anyone who has another job that may potentially be focused on a different area. But if we look at these, we assess the priority and the impact of these risks, and we can take them kind of on a case-by-case basis. It takes that 268 and breaks it down into much smaller, more consumable sizes to allow us to focus on the things that are most critical to the business, and the ones that may have the lowest impact or lowest risk can just be down at the bottom and be dealt with at a later time. So what are those 6 steps for getting started? Well, when you look at the compliance score, what we're talking about is getting a baseline for how are we as an organization? What's our current, assess our current status as an organization as it relates to compliance. When we look at those, again, looking at the different areas that are out there, ultimately, when you look at them, not looking at is what do we need to fix to make sure we have a great score. We really need to focus on where are we currently and what are our biggest risks. You can't know where you're going until you know where you are. And ultimately, that really starts with just assessing where we are and taking appropriate action. From there, oh, perfect. Thank you. So in summary with that, what we're talking about is assess your IT security posture. You again, kind of mentioned it on the previous slide. Thank you, Jennifer. It's perfect way to summarize that. But we can't know where we need to go until we know where we are. Make a requirements list based on the business needs. So when you look at what the business needs are, ultimately understand where you are currently, prioritize those requirements, and take appropriate actions to secure the business. And then dedicate resources to monitor key areas and periodically review and update those policies. When we look at these, what we're talking about is a lot of these things that are required need resources to be able to do them. It takes time, not only from the IT staff that may be doing them, but from the end users who have to consume that as well. It's not as simple as we turn something on and it's working. There are ramifications that can happen. So understanding that and taking a holistic approach to the entire organization will ensure that security becomes ingrained in the fabric of the company, as opposed to something that IT arbitrarily does. And remember, kind of talked about at the beginning, is a layered approach. It is not a one-size-fits-all kind of mentality. Security is made up of a lot of little things that continue to protect the organization that need to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And with that, Jennifer, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Sean. I'd like to pass this over to Michael. He's going to be giving an update on the Microsoft 365 backup solutions.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Sean, that's very good information. I couldn't said it any better. I mean, realistically, telling everybody that it's a multi-layered approach is so mission critical to have everybody understand how of a big task this is right at first. And Jennifer, thank you so much for that awesome intro. I really do appreciate it. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Deemer, systems engineer here for Veeam. And I'm going to kind of walk you through what it looks like from the Veeam perspective. And what I do also want to touch on a little bit first is a little bit about Veeam. Some of you guys may be very familiar with it. Some may have never heard of us or have heard about us in some form or fashion. So at the end of the day, what is Veeam? Veeam is the most trusted provider for backup solutions that deliver modern protection. Now, that's a pretty bold claim, right? So why do we choose Veeam for all of these challenges? Really, at the end of the day, this really comes down to a couple key steps, which one is going to be simplistic, flexible, reliable, and powerful. But what I also want to touch on is kind of our product's design and physiologically how everything is kind of managed and put together. Some of our three principles, I know it shows four, but I just want to touch on three because it really leads up to the fourth one here. Some of our three main principles is simplicity, flexibility, and reliability. When you have all three of these matched together, you get a very powerful solution. Now, these three principles really drive home and build a solution that are easy to use, right? We need to have something that's easy for end users to consume and making sure that it's easy to administer at the end of the day as well. And being flexible, Sean said it multiple times, being flexible inside an environment and not being, we have to do this and we have to do that. There's flexibilities to everything, and that is one thing Veeam is really good at because we're agnostic. We really fit into a lot of different environments out there. And it doesn't matter if you're, a small mom and pop shop or a full-blown enterprise, we're going to be able to fit in. So that's one of the biggest things that I really want to kind of touch on. And that's really a stark contrast from a lot of the other solutions that require full-blown platforms and hardware and this, that, and the other, just for the simplest task to back up a VM or back up a physical server. So that's really what I want to kind of show from at least the high value architecture side. And if we could just move on to the next one here, I'm going to kind of talk about kind of our modern protection strategy. Now, this might be obvious to say, but if data is number one for business, asset for businesses after people, right? We got to have people to have data. Protecting the data is really super effective, right? We have to have that to be well managed. And what does this data do? Well, this data provides the foundation to drive and innovate faster and deliver improved customer ads and employee basically experiences, right? If we didn't have the data, we can't build off of it. We can't actually go further because we're always going to be taking a step back because it wasn't protected. Now, this is the biggest thing with, digital transformation in a whole. We have everything from protecting your data to multiple clouds to monitoring your DR and orchestration, to basically unleashing all these securities that Sean was here talking about today. And moving here into our next slide, I kind of just want to talk a very high value of what the Veeam platform is, because it's not just a, hey, we just have agents. Hey, we just have O365. It's really an all-encompassing backup solution from anything from cloud, software as a service, apps, virtual machines, and then all those little things below. I'm not going to read all the little stuff for Active Directory and Hyper-V, but at the end of the day, this is really a big ransomware and security platform overall. And we can protect anything from on-prem to public cloud to backup as a service or disaster recovery as a service. And one of the things I really think that it really stands out about for us is one, backup and recovery, making sure that your data is always available to be backed up and restored to the form and fashion that you think it was actually backed up is also mission critical. Monitoring and analytics, disaster recovery orchestration, right? You have data center one goes down. What do we need? We need it up and spun up in data center two, and then storage, analytics, and management APIs. I couldn't speak a lot into this because it would just go into complete ramble mode, but there's a lot of stuff that we can do from a very high level to really make sure that you guys are protected and good to go. Now, why do organizations need Office 365 backup? Now, I just want to take a quick second here. I bet a lot of you guys think, as of right now, well, hey, my data is in O365. That means they're protecting it. They are the ones that should be kind of liable for that data. Well, I'm going to get into a couple of the slides here a little bit later, and I think your guys' eyes are going to open up about why we need to actually take a backup for Office 365. Now, on the next screen here, what I really want to talk about is just some of the 6 reasons why we need a backup outside of the one that I'm going to show you, which is really mission critical. Accidental deletion. You know, you might have Sally from HR or from Bob from accounting, and they do misplace a whole bunch of files. Well, guess what? That falls in the file folder of accidental deletion. And I also want to say retention policy gaps and confusion gaps are really high up there, where they think there's protected, they think that their O365 data is protected for a longer period than it is by default, and it's actually not. There's kind of like a false sense of hope. Now, internal security threats. This is where I want to really point out when we have malicious insiders. You might have a departing employee from the inside. And how do we really make sure that it's secured is really having a backup just in case they want to get rid of a whole bunch of data that they're trying to hide, right? But if you have a backup of it, guess what? You just restore from the backup and you're good to go. And this kind of leads me to the same thing, external security threats. Sean talked a lot about, ransomware and rogue apps and making sure that our environment is locked down with a key and making sure that everything is really good. And I think that is very, very, very mission critical to exactly what we really need to do at the end of the day. Because if we don't have that, guess what? You're going to have this ransomware. You're going to have Trojan EXEs. You're going to have some type of malware trying to get in and exploit you guys for money. At the end of the day, that's the name of the game, is getting money, and they want it back in their pocket somehow. Now, the last thing I want to touch about is really the legal compliance. Now, the legal compliance is really great because we can keep your data for not just 1 year, 5 years, 25 years. We can keep that data forever. And especially if you're going through something and you have maybe a malicious insider, right? Or a departing employee, and you didn't have that extra oomph or the extra backup to kind of revert back to that. It might be a lot of subpoenas and things that you just don't want to go down, rather than just pulling it out and sending it over to the lawyers, whatever that may be. And the last thing I really want to touch on is managing hybrid deployments and migrations. With Veeam, in a nutshell, we don't care if you're on-prem or if you're in the cloud. If you're doing this migration from, and I would say a lot of people are migrating from their physical on-prem servers to those Office 365 databases up in Azure. This is really where this really comes into play, is we can help with that migration, really making it seamless and very, very effective at the end of the day. Now, I did say 6 things, but I also have a 7th one. I have a little something up my sleeve here. So there is a 7th reason why, and I kind of put this on its own dedicated slide because a lot of people nowadays are using Teams. And with Teams, it's not like most applications where it's just stored in one SQL database or, DB somewhere. It's, really spread out across multiple different things inside of Microsoft Office 365, and it's not a contained application. And it's really from SharePoint sites down to some metadata here and there. So it really gets kind of complex to mitigate these risks. And one of the things that we're really good at doing here at Veeam is making sure that we can restore that data. So you need to go back and restore a Teams chat. You need to go back and restore a Teams channel. This is something that we can do, and I'll kind of show you a little bit later on some of my slides how easy it is. But just to kind of get you guys in that kind of ballpark is, when you're thinking about restoring from Veeam, it's literally picking out the point in time state that you want to go back to and next finish. And what I really mean next finish is just pointing to the mount location that you want to send it back to and finish. And that's it. You're going to wait for it to restore. And most time restoring process takes literally less than 5 minutes, especially if it's a small data set. Even with the larger data sets, as long as we're, this depends where it lives at the end of the day, but it's usually pretty fast. All right. Now, on the other thing, I do want to touch on IDC, or some of our top analytics analyst firm here. Now, on the next slide, what is this really going to be talking about? This is really talking about what the top analyst firm has to say about Veeam backup for Office 365. Now, at the end of the day, and I'm literally about to get into this here on my next slides, but I do want to kind of just put this back into perspective of your data is your data, and making sure that you're protecting your data, your company's data, is really, really imperative. Now, regardless if it's on-prem or in the cloud infrastructure, such as software as a service, aka O365, the ultimate responsibility really relies on the customer or the company to protect that data. Now, adopting this O365 without an enterprise backup grade is really risky. And the reason I say that is we kind of talked about it here a little bit earlier, is those 7 different key ways of protecting that data and why things happen. Now, if you guys want to, you can grab that URL at the bottom and kind of read over the full report. It'd probably take me another 20 minutes to get you guys all dialed in there, but there's a ton of takeaways, recommendations, and actions that we can use to be leveraged. Now, one of the things that I've really been nipping here at is the Office 365 shared responsibility model. Now, on the top, you're going to see all the Office 365 responsibility model. If you just hit next, I think this has a build out on it here, Jennifer. Thank you very much. I think there's a couple more. I think maybe 2, 3, and 4, maybe. We'll see. All right, cool. So Microsoft, what is it going to be responsible for at the end of the day? Well, their infrastructure. They're going to make sure that you can log in and have uptime to all their cloud services. So if you go to office365.com, they're going to make sure it's available for you. Now, the other biggest thing they're going to do is geo-redundancy. They're going to make sure if an outage happens in a particular zone, it's also going to be in another zone, just to make sure that is actually geo-redundant and actually accessible to you outside of, maybe if you're in California, they're going to have one on the East Coast, just to really make sure that you can still talk to that data and your data's there. Now, they also do recycle bin. Now, this is very limited and is short-term data loss recovery, but at the end of the day, it's not a point-in-time recovery, which is very different from how Veeam looks at backups. Now, the other thing I want to talk, and especially on the Microsoft services side, is infrastructure. And I think Sean did a great job earlier talking about how there's all these different layers to getting into a data center and getting, physical security, right? So where that physical security is, actual an iris scanner, or physical security to get into a firewall, stuff like that. Logistical security, app level security, and then user admin controls. That's one of the biggest things that they're going to be able to do from a very high level, making sure that their environments, their servers, everything like that, are very keen and in touch with exactly all the monitoring, analytics, and all the security that actually needs to happen behind the scenes. Now, let's talk about regulatory, right? What is the role of data processor, right? At the end of the day, this is really making sure that controls for industry certifications, HIPAA, DoD, DOJ, things like that, are basically submitted in different queues. There's always different things for different folks, and this is the same thing, where HIPAA has its own category, DoD, DOJ, and then enterprise and so on. Now, let's talk about your responsibility. This is kind of what I was leaving it up to, is Microsoft is going to guarantee they have uptime, that you can log into their servers and that you can get your data back to a degree, right? Now, but accessing your data, that's something that you have to control. So having some way to access to their servers. But more importantly is that data. That data is yours. The data, even if you go to Microsoft.com and you go up and you look at the responsibility model, you're going to find right on their homepage that they're going to declare, like, hey, it's your responsibility to back up your data. Now, they'll do a little bit of it, and I'll kind of show you here on the next slide what they will back up and how long they'll keep that data. But most of you guys are going to be like, oh, well, that's lackluster, and that's not exactly what I'm looking for, especially when it comes to keeping my data and keeping it for long term. Now, some of the stuff that is very mission critical, and I think Sean touched on this very keenly, is accidental deletion, malicious insiders, employee retaliation, and evidence tampering, right? So that's like litigation hold, things like that, litigation hold. And if you have those particular users, right, you have malicious insiders, this is stuff that you're responsible for. And on the outside, so that's all your internal threats. But on the outside, you still have these external threats, which is ransomware, malware, hackers, rogue apps. And where do these mostly come in from is people not setting up permissions right. not having the network dialed in so that way you're not actually touching on those things. You have no idea. You're just leaving it wide open and they walk right in because they have no other choice but to do so because it's so wide open. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I've been in an environment and I'm like, wow, this is pretty wide open. And, you know, we'll have a discussion and they just didn't know that there's just so many holes and there's so many different ways to get in. I want to say one of the biggest ways people hackers are really getting in is rogue apps, because they have so many high value permissions to get in and do whatever they really need to. Now, at the end of the day, what does this really boil down to? Role for your data, and it's your owner's data, right? So the company's data. This is making sure that you can answer to corporate and industrial regulations, right? So if your particular field is HIPAA, you're going to have to jump through a lot more hoops than you would if you're like a car mechanic. Now, am I saying that HIPAA is not as secure as a car mechanic? No, they can be both subpar. They can both be to the same degree. Now, is there different different particular walls and things that they have to jump over? Yes, absolutely. There's definitely bigger things that HIPAA's going to have to jump over than your regular old mom and pop shops, especially brick and mortars, just because it's not so software as a solutions. There's not so many things that are out there and about. But again, this is very, very mission critical for exactly what we need to talk about here today. Now, I do want to show you on our next slide here, this is going to show you exactly what Microsoft Office 365 does for your backups. As you notice, inbox folder data is probably going to be the longest one, almost at the 2-year mark. It's actually right on the 2-year mark. Now, everything outside of that, though, you're going to see that drop significantly, all the way down to a month. So deleted items. So you deleted an email, right? Maybe, you know, like I said, Bob from accounting deleted an email, or, you know, HR forgot a piece of email, they deleted it, didn't think they needed it. Auto archive. So basically, once it goes into your archive, it's going to be archived after the 1-month mark. Deleted SharePoint data, which is really critical, right? There's a whole bunch of times where I used to be an MSP admin, and redoing SharePoint sites was almost a daily or a weekly thing for sure. Same thing with OneDrive. OneDrive has really picked up speed ever since the work from home option has really been out there, just because a lot of people are out there using it as a file share. Now, is that recommended? No, but you do see a lot of companies doing that. And then the last one here is the employees actually leaving the company. And again, as soon as, well, and this does say 1 month, but if you do terminate the license, it's gone. It's just how it works. There's nothing else. It's going to be permanently deleted. So I also want to kind of show here on the next slide of, you know, when do we actually find out how often, or when do we actually kind of on average find out that we've had, you know, a compromise? And it's usually about 140 days in, which if you notice, it's going to be gone for the most part. So your default settings are from 30 to 90 days, really kind of depending how you tweak them. But really at the 140-day mark is really when you start to notice those particular compromises in your data. Now, let's look at what that looks like compared to Veeam. When we have it backed up with Veeam, it's going to be completely different. So it's 1 week, 1 month, 3 years, 5 years. And we can go to 25 years or keep that data forever. So it really kind of depends how long you want to keep that data. But as you can see here, it really doesn't matter where it lives. As long as we have a backup of it, we can go back at a point in time and recover that data, and really making sure that we're filling all of those gaps. Because at the end of the day, I think, again, is retention policies can be very confusing to the outward eye. And if you don't understand what you're doing, you might set yourself up and you think that you're golden and you have everything under control. And then guess what? 3 months goes by, 6 months goes by. You're like, it's fine. Something happened. And you're like, oh, I can't get that data back. And you reach out, and it turns out that you just didn't set up the retention policy to meet those particular gaps. And now you see that you're missing data, and now it's not good, right? It just really makes a lot of people stressed out, and I've been there, trust me. It's not a fun look. And then really what else I want to touch about is going to be the recovery options that we have for Microsoft Office 365. And that's going to be here on our next slide. And this is really going to show a whole bunch of different encompassing things that we can do. Anything from Exchange, OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. Now, if you kind of look at this at a very high level, I'm not going to get into every one of these because they're very, very similar, but these are called our Explorers. And these Explorers at the end of the day are how we get our data back. So if you had something for Exchange, you would go into the Exchange Explorer. Same thing for OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams. Now, there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do in here. A lot of people are really used to the Exchange side, right? So I'm going to kind of talk to that just because I feel like a lot more people understand it. Now, let's just say that you need to get a message back or get an email back. You can do it a couple different ways. You can even PST it if you need to, like if you're offboarding somebody, you can take a PST of the entire mailbox, or you can actually just send back this piece of mail to either you, yourself, or multiple different users. It really doesn't matter there. Say if it's like a shared email box for accounting, you want to send it to the entire accounting team, you can do that. Same thing with OneDrive. OneDrive's very similar. Well, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams are going to be very similar in their subsets. You can see prior versions. You can see all the folder counts. You can really get into the nuts and bolts about, when they were actually touched last. When was a SharePoint site actually made? Who made it? And when was the last time there was any type of change to that SharePoint site? And it's all going to be in the log. And that's really very, very good to know when you're going back and restoring. You're restoring back to the point in time state that you're looking for. All right, so here's some of our take actions, right? Is really making sure that if you found anything from mine or Sean's beautiful webinar here today, go and get this in a lab. Like, get your hands on it. Personally, I love getting my hands dirty with it because that way I can test out all the limitations and get everything that I want to make sure that I want to do, to make sure it can do it at a very high level and get into all the nitty and gritty details, making sure that we're getting exactly what you're paying for. At this time, I'm going to pass this back over to Jennifer. Thank you guys so much for coming out here and hanging out with us today. I know we're going to have a Q&A session, so stick around.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. We'll start our Q&A session right now. If you have a question for Michael or Sean, please go ahead and type it in the chat. And wow, that's a lot of different options, Michael, for backup for Microsoft 365. But it's such an expansive platform though. So it makes sense that there's so many options.
Absolutely. Tons of different options for all different types of folks.
Yeah. Our first question is going to be for Sean today. It says, why would you recommend SYS20 over other security frameworks?
So recommending SYS20 over others, I would say the recommendation would be is that if you've never dealt with a security framework, SYS20 has the least barriers to entry to understanding it. When you look at the Center for Internet Security website, they break it down very easily for you in how to consume that security framework, as well as they offer a free assessment tool that allows you to assess where you are against that framework. The recommendation for that really wouldn't be that over another. It's really is that if you don't understand the security frameworks out there, you don't know, it's a good segue into going to something that could be much more extensive, like something like NIST 850, 800. 171. They are get much more in depth when you talk about DoD and any government entities that you're regulated by. But ultimately, CIS is a good way to get started with security frameworks, ultimately to help you continue to mature along the way to whatever that next level may be.
Okay, thanks, Sean. All right, the next question is for Michael, and it's about the mailbox restoration that you're talking about. So how hard is it to restore a full Microsoft 365 mailbox?
Yeah, very good question. So let's just pretend that you do find a user and he needs his full mailbox restored. Maybe he moved to a new computer, whatever that may be. It's honestly super, super easy. You just go into the Explorer, you pick out their mailbox, left click and say full-blown restore, point it to the new mount point, next, finish, and off you go. And it's already going to be restoring there for you. So very, very simplistic, and almost anybody can do it.
Okay, I have another question about backups for you, Michael. It's how often can we back up the tenant?
Ooh, awesome. Yeah, so we can be very granular. So we can do everything from 5 minutes to 8 hours, really kind of anything in between. You can even back it up continuously. Now, it all kind of depends on what your guys' schema is and how often you want to back up, but you can go down to a very low denominator and always have a backup job being kicked off.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, this one looks like it's for Sean. Where should we focus our attention in the event of multiple high priority security risks?
This is also, this is one that I think will always be, depending on who's bringing up the risk or who is affected by the risk, is really going to always be a question of having the appropriate conversations. When you're looking at risk in terms of priorities, the ones that will be the easiest to implement from my perspective, when you look at those, if it's a high priority and it's kind of easy to implement, those are the ones that you should really tackle first, simply because if it's low cost to implement, or it has the least impact on end users or technology, when it comes to that, those are always the ones that I would say prioritize first, simply because it's going to allow you to implement it faster than, say, something else that's of equal priority, but is much more extensive in the deployment, the cost, the rollout strategy, etc.
Okay, and one more question for you, Sean. What are some easy wins that we can deploy that will help kickstart a security improvement plan?
So when you look at easy wins, to me, things like identity access management, to me, is one of the probably easiest to roll out, simply because when you talk about identity access management, this is anything, if you look at Microsoft's identity access management, the others that may be out there, the Oktas, the One Logins, the Ping Identities, SAML and the SAML protocol is becoming so mainstream with a lot of the applications that we're using, that because it's so easy to implement, securing all those different credentialing databases across many SaaS apps that are out there, it allows you to simplify the management, not only of the administration of the users, but in the event, like Michael had said, with rogue users, if you had to lock someone out quickly, it allows you to go to one place to be able to do that. So identity access management, to me, is probably one of the first and foremost. And I will preface this, as long as backups is not out there, hanging out there. If backups and disaster recovery is hanging out there, that's the easiest of easy wins there, because that means you can always get it back. Ultimately, the only one I see, two-factor authentication on everything, and consumers have two-factor authentication on pretty much anything that's out there at this point, down to your Instagrams and your Facebooks. Two-factor authentication should be on every business application that we use, and it shouldn't even be a question.
Yeah, I know that the first time I actually saw two-factor authentication was my husband had some gamer friends, and they were all all of their online game passcodes were all 2FA. I think that was before my bank even implemented it.
Yep.
All right, the last question is for Michael, and it's, how long can I back up my Microsoft 365 data for?
Ooh, very good question. Very good question. So it's really forever. If you want to keep it for 3 months, 6 months, 25 years, or if you want to just keep that data forever, Veeam is going to be able to accomplish that goal. You just need to point it to a repository and off you go. So yeah, it really kind of depends on what your guys' level is and how long you want to keep it. But at the end of the day, we can keep it as long and as far and as wide as you want it.
Just realized I was muted. Thank you.
Yeah,
that was the last question we have today. So I'm going to throw up your contact information on the screen. And Grant, do you want to say a couple closing words for today?
Absolutely. Big thank you to Michael and Sean. Really appreciate both of you putting in the time and effort today to have this presentation be so understandable and help us better understand how we as companies, partners, clients can better protect ourselves, secure our environments, have the backup strategies in place so that way we can be more successful together. So really appreciate it. And of course, Jennifer, thank you so much for being our wonderful host and getting us kicked off and wrapped up. So really appreciate everyone's attendance today. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for being here, and we will be sending out a link to the recording when it is complete. And please reach out to our wonderful panelists if you have any questions about any of the content that you saw today. With that, have an absolutely wonderful day, and go ahead and I guess it's only Thursday, but I feel like it's already the weekend. So have a fabulous Friday and then also a great weekend. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.